Welcome to Content Disrupted, bold takes on brand marketing. I'm your host, Casey Noble, and together we'll explore what it takes to excel in brand marketing at one of the most exciting and disruptive times in industry history.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Content Disrupted, bold takes on brand marketing. Today, I am honored to be joined by Dan Ariely, famed professor of psychology and behavioral economics at Duke University, and best-selling author of several books, including Predictably Irrational and Misbelief, What Makes Rational People Believe Irrational Things. Welcome to the show, Professor Ariely.
Lovely to be here.
Awesome. So, as we were just talking about, typically we speak with chief marketing officers, but I'm really excited to be able to bring in more interdisciplinary thinking here and discuss some of the topics that are really top of mind for our audience with you through that behavioral economics lens. So, I thought we would start just diving into a big challenge, and I'll frame this out for you here that a lot of our marketing audience are facing today, which involves kind of navigating the responsible use of AI and particularly new forms of generative AI in marketing, and marketing content creation today. And there's a lot of anxiety around brand reputation, consumer reactions to the use of AI, given that, consumer mistrust in general seems to be at an all-time high regardless. And now there's incidents of sort of AI spoofing and the ease of spreading misinformation that are like adding to this mix. So I thought to really unpack this, marketers could use some perspective from you on how all of this is playing out or just kind of playing into how we as humans perceive and evaluate information, especially in today's landscape. So, in your book, Misbelief, fascinating book, by the way, and I recommend everybody pick up a copy. So we will have information in the show notes. You're really examining in part, the misinformation landscape and our human kind of attraction and reactions to misinformation in part. So I'm wondering if you can start by just explaining to our listeners your core thesis in the book and kind of what impacts this is having on our brains as consumers.
Lots of topics to cover here, and I like the very broad framing, and hopefully we'll get there and make some progress. But this book is really about the psychology of the individual. And we all have people in our lives, a close circle, further away circle, that if we looked at them 5 years ago, we would say, me and this other person look at life in the same way. We're looking at things the same way, interpreting in the same way, and there are people that are no longer in this category. There are people that we look at these days and say, I don't understand how these people look at the same world as I do and come up to such different conclusions. And I'm trying to identify this machinery that takes people and changes them over time to start believing in all kinds of things. And there are two big issues here. One is this machinery that gets people to believe in things they shouldn't, in misbeliefs. But then there's, of course, the bigger issue, which is the issue of trust. And what I come to at the end of the book is to basically say, look, there's this mechanism. And yes, people start believing in all kinds of things, but misbelief is not just in believing something that ain't so about the real world, is also adopting it as a framework from which you view everything. And if that framework includes lack of trust, it has huge implications on society. So as we deal with those topics, trust is going to become very important, right? And trust is easy to break, very hard to create, and we need to think about it very, very carefully. But let's start by what is this machine? What gets normal people to start believing things that that ain't so, and use that as a main framework from which to manage and view their lives? And the starting conditions are stress. So that's kind of the building block. If people are not stressed, nothing bad is going to happen in terms of misbeliefs. And the stress that I have in mind here is not the stress that say, oh, I'm so busy, I don't know how I'll finish with my calendar or email and so on. It's a stress of saying, I don't understand the world. I don't know why I'm getting the things I'm getting. I'm not sure why I'm not getting my share. My parents told me I should be more successful. What is going on? I don't understand the war. I don't understand lots of things like that. And of course, COVID had a big period of that. And when those things happen, we have a need to come up with a story. We have a need to come up with story because these stories help us feel as if we have control. So we're looking for a story, ideally a story with a villain, and that story with the villain calms us down a little bit in the beginning, right? Where you say to yourself, why are things not working out for me? Why is the world like this? What is happening to my profession? And so on. And you say, okay, here's the villain, here's the story, here's the mechanism. I understand it a little bit. I feel a bit more in control. Of course, long term, there's a deterioration. So that's kind of the breeding ground, stress. And by the way, we are living now in a period of very low resilience. If you ask the question of what helps us all deal with stress, it's resilience. Resilience is like the antidote for stress. You can have the same life events. If you have higher resilience, it wouldn't have an impact on you. You have low resilience, it will have a big impact. Why am I saying that we're at the low time of resilience? It's because we don't have very deep social networks. We are spending more time with our nuclear family, but less time with friends. Polarization in society. At work, we have more work relationship and less friendly relationship. So we have lots of stress, low resilience, and therefore we're looking for stories that explain to us the world, ideally with the villain, so we don't feel it's our fault, it's somebody else's. It's somebody else's fault. The next thing that we have is cognitive. We choose to view the information that we already believe in. We look for what is called confirmation bias, right? Nobody wants to think too hard. Nobody wants to be challenged too often. So what do? We pick the information we already agree, and everything we see we agree with. It's easier, it's more comfortable, it's less difficult to deal with. And we end up believing more and more the things we started. But there's a couple of other interesting things in the cognitive part. And one of them is that we have dramatically more confidence than knowledge in almost everything we do. So I'll ask you, think about your last 3 years and think about how many times in the last 3 years you had a discussion with somebody. Let's say for an hour. For half an hour, you expressed your position and they listened. For half an hour, they expressed their position and you listened. At the end of that hour, in the last 3 years, how many times did it happen to you that somebody came to you and say, you know what, Casey? You're absolutely right. I listened to you for the last hour and you convinced me I'm going to change my opinion completely and adapt your point of view.
Absolutely 0, and I could say, speaking from personal experience, that I probably spend most of the time listening to them speaking and building my own counter arguments for how I'm gonna come back. Just as a content creator, I think that that's a natural instinct.
That's right. So first of all, we all have to admit that we haven't been that successful in convincing anybody else, and we all would probably admit that we have not been convinced by other people. And the reason is exactly what you said, because yes, we talk for half an hour, they talk for half an hour, but when they talk for half an hour, we don't listen. We counter argue. We start hearing their sentence, we don't let them finish. We already in our mind are defending our territory, and we're doing this. What is the method of the illusion of explanatory depth? It's basically about not attacking people by asking them to elaborate on. So, for example, I ask people to tell me how much they understand how a flush toilet works. People say, I understand it very well. On a scale from 0 to 10, really, really well. I said, great. Instead of challenging them, I said, here are all the pieces for a flush toilet. Please assemble one. Of course, nobody can assemble one. And then I say, okay, so how well do you understand it? And it turns out that that's the principle of the illusion of explanatory depth, is you don't attack people. You just ask them to explain things in more detail. Now, that doesn't change people's opinion dramatically from right to left and so on. But the moment people's confidence is lower, they're more open to opinions. So we said there's stress, there's the cognitive element, there's personality element. I'll give you one example from the personality. There's a question we call the bat and the ball. It's a little math problem. And the math problem goes like this. A baseball bat and a baseball ball cost together $1.10. A baseball bat and a baseball ball cost together $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. And the question is, how much does the ball cost? And when you ask people this question, then people come up with 10 cents. Together 10, the difference is $1. 10 cents sounds reasonable. Most people kind of come up with it intuitively. And then some people say it, 10 cents. And some people check themselves. But the question is, do we trust our intuition? Do we trust the thing that first popped to our mind and say, oh, if it popped to our mind, it must be correct? Or do we test ourselves? And it turns out that there are more misbelievers among those who trust their initial intuition. Oh, I saw that YouTube video, looks right to me, let me adopt that. So we have a few interesting happening on the cognitive side, the way we frame information, think about it, and we have a few things on the personality side. Of course, there's more to say. And then there's the last component, which is the social component. And I call this whole process the funnel of misbelief. And the reason I use the term funnel is to kind of get us to think about the idea that it actually is progressively getting worse. And when people just start exploring ideas of misbelief, they can still come back. But if it gets too late, it's very, very hard to change them. So what happens in this social element? We said stress, cognition, personality, and social. And we said social is what seals the deal. What's in that social element? So maybe I'll just talk about two elements within it. One of them is called shibolet. Shibolet is this term that comes from the Bible. And it's a story in the Bible that there were these two tribes that had a very tough fight. And at the end of the tribe settled on two sides of the river. And then they would walk around and they would meet people and they would try to understand if it's from their tribe or on the other tribe. And it just so happened that these two tribes pronounced the name of the plant, shibolet, in a different way. One of them said shibolet and one of them said sibolet. So imagine you and I meet and I show you this plant and I say, hey, how do you call this plant? And if you call it the way I call it, we're brothers, we're from the same tribe, everything is okay. And if you call it the way the other tribe calls it, okay, now we're in, I need to chase you away or try and hurt you or something like that. And we use the term shibolet to signal a conversation that is not about the real thing, but about identity. So imagine I show you this plant and I say, what's the name? Do I really care about the name? No. What I care about is a signal of which tribe you belong to. Now, if you think about it, there's lots of discussion that are like that. Think about discussions in the political. How many of those you would say, you know what? It feels as if it's a discussion about the real thing, but it's not. It's a discussion about people showing their identity, right? And then the last thing I'll talk about in the social realm, although there are more, is cognitive dissonance. In cognitive dissonance, and everybody heard the term, and the basic idea with cognitive dissonance is that often we think that our preferences drive our behavior. I like X, Y, and Z, therefore I behave in a way that is compatible in X, Y, and Z. But what cognitive dissonance is saying is that our actions also drive our preferences. I act in way X, Y, or Z. I buy something, I go to a demonstration, I join a cult, whatever it is, and my preferences follow. And therefore, the more extreme my opinions, my actions are, it would drag my opinions with it. And this is, by the way, why it is so hard to change things. If people go down into a particular group and they express their connection to it and shibboleth and so on, but they also do things. They post a few things on social media, maybe they go to a demonstration, maybe they make some friends and so on. How likely are people to say later on, you know what, I was wrong? It's just not human. Instead, what we would see is they will recruit all of their capacity to convince themselves that they were right all along and make themselves even more sure about their opinions than the beginning, even if there's a threat to the accuracy of their belief. But all of this is within the envelope of not trusting. And the moment we start adopting misbeliefs, and it doesn't matter about what it is, it just means that we believe that there are forces out there that are big and complex and powerful, and they have bad intentions. And if we start thinking about the world this way, everything will look like somebody did it. One day I was on some radio show and I talked about misbelief, and then one of the listeners called me, and not called me, he wrote me, he emailed me, and he said he listened to the radio show, and there was a case in his town of salmonella poisoning with some salad material. And he asked me, what do I think, where this poisoning came from? And I said, people were probably not careful. Let's hope that they reviewed the process, they improved it. Hopefully, they improved other things as well. But he was sure that this was intentional by the company, because the company that was, producing this salad had a different political opinion to the people in that particular town. So you encounter something like salmonella poisoning, and your first reaction is it's on purpose. Somebody's doing it. Now think about what a difficult perspective this is. And if we go back to the topic that you start with, you know, all companies should recognize that from time to time they will make mistakes. How are people going to look at those mistakes? Are they going to look at them and say, okay, people make mistakes from time to time? Or are they saying, my goodness, I always knew that company X was against everybody. I always knew that they were really a front for some evil organization and so on. So, there's kind of trust in the whole world, but I think companies also should worry about the trust for them specifically, right? I would love for all of us to fix trust in the world in general and in all communication. I think it's important, right? I think if it was up to me, I would think that all marketing organizations should try and band together and to say, we are together going to create standards for ethical communication, because we all get to benefit and we all get to lose. If a few companies start misbehaving, they lose in the long term, but everybody else loses as well, right? If we started looking at all advertising not as information, not as something that can be trustworthy, but we start looking at it as here's another attempt to manipulate and take advantage of us, everybody would lose.
That seems particularly relevant right now in terms of, people's feelings about generative AI, because we've seen many brands rush to adopt new technology without necessarily stopping first and thinking about, okay, what is our organization's ethical standard going to be? What are the potential implications? How are we going to manage this internally? How are we going to create responsibility and oversight of the testing, the implementation process, and being transparent about those standards? So some brands have gone, have taken some of those steps. I don't know if everybody's really there in terms of transparency of that and like making a buyer aware, because increasingly buyers are concerned about those types of things. But definitely the call for, as an industry, folks to come together and establish standards, and then how you can signal compliance, with those standards. I agree, will be really critical. I wanted to hone in on something you were talking about in terms of mistrust, with sort of, there's this breeding ground right now for mistrust in general. There is, if a crisis management situation where, say, something happens and then you're dealing with the loss of trust of customers from, say, something like salmonella poisoning from your per- perceived from your, product, let's say. But then there's this broader mistrust that seems particularly prevalent right now in, government, obviously media, and then it's extending into companies and brands in general. So I think most marketers don't want to make sure that they're not part of spreading misinformation inadvertently, certainly not disinformation intentionally, spreading inaccurate information, but are sort of getting lumped into this. People, what's the point of marketing if people are not going to be convinced of anything that I say because I'm a brand, So then you have the rise of influencer marketing. Now people don't believe influencers because it's the perception is everyone is being paid. So how do we sort of are there things that brands can do to earn trust? Like, earn that, claw that back to and to sort of, counteract this perception that there's nothing to be believed.
So, couple of things about trust. Maybe the first important thing is to show effort, and we call this operational transparency. And the idea is that if somebody works hard for us, we think that we feel differently about them and about their services. So there's a story that is probably not true about Picasso. Picasso sitting in the park in the bench. A woman comes to him and says, "Picasso, you're so amazing. Can you draw a picture of me?" And he does this thing for 20 seconds and he gives it to her. And he says, "That will be $500." And the woman said, $500 for 20 seconds? He said, "No, no, no. It's 30 years and 20 seconds. Right? It took me 30 years to get good at this. Don't do it this way." But of course, it's very hard to pay. Even Picasso, we would all have a hard time paying Picasso $500 for 20 seconds, even though it's probably a good, probably an amazing deal. And the idea is that when we see people working for us more, we are more likely to value something, right? So if you think about online, we don't see effort. If you think about banking, we don't see the banking working for us. So operational transparency is about communicate the effort, show people that you're holding their personal information in a very secure way, that you're investing all kinds of things in encryption. Show them that you're spending money on getting things better. We worked once with a company who provided services that some people could consume for free. And then the company, we had a process that told people, "Hey, use this service for free. You could, but we have lots of engineers that work hard. If you want, give us money." And lots of people were very happy to pay money, right? But it was about, we had lots of engineers. They worked very hard. Here is what they create for you. What do you feel about it? Oh, you worked hard. I'm very happy to do it. But how much software do we look at? How many times are we happy to pay $5 for coffee, but we're not willing to pay $2 for an app that will give us more joy than a cup of coffee? Right. So something about operational transparency, about getting people to to understand how much effort we put in. But if we go more specifically in trust, I think there's kind of three types of trusts. The first type of trust is transparency. And transparency is not real trust. It says, "You know what, Casey, I'll have a camera on me all times, so you can rest assured that I'm not doing anything undesirable." Now, like, this is not the trust you want in your significant other, right? But it's like one step. It's not the right step, but it's basically saying, let's make it so that the other person cannot misbehave. But it's not real trust. The second level of trust is for people to show that they care more about the other person. We kind of all know that, right? If you and I met, not in a public place, and I wanted you to tell me a secret, what is the way that we all know that we would get the other person to share some secrets? We tell secrets first. Right? Let me tell you some things about my past relationships. Here's some very painful things, some things I've learned, some things I regret. And basically, I make myself vulnerable. I basically say, I'm not asking you to be vulnerable first. I am the vulnerable first. Right? And therefore, I say, here's the key. Like, if you know now something about me, that if you wanted to, you can ruin some of my reputation. Right? I'm basically doing that and giving you position of power. And that's the thing, to show I care about you. I'm doing something, I'm willing to give up something on myself. I'm willing to take risk. I'm willing to share something about myself. I'm giving you the control. And the third level of trust is about long-term aligned interests. Long-term aligned interests. What are long-term aligned interests? It's basically saying, you know what, we're having this conversation now, but just so you know, my intention is that we will keep on having these conversations for the next 10 years. And I hope that we'll have projects together and so on. So I'm basically saying, yes, we have this short-term interaction, but my real interest is in a long-term interaction. Um, I was recently in a country last week. I was in a country in South America where the citizens have very low trust in their government, and they asked me what can the president do, and I said that the president, one of the things the president could do is to say, my legacy will be successful if at the end of my presidency the level of trust of citizens in government has increased. Now, think about what it says, right? It says my interest, and I'm putting it on a kind of announcement right now that my goal is that you will trust more, right? And if I don't succeed, my legacy will be a failure. Think about what it does, right? It says long-term aligned interest. I care about I care about trust. You care about trust. I'm going to work hard on it, and please judge me on my success in doing that. So in a low trust environment, companies need to work harder. I think we both agree that it's incredibly important for organizations to think about how do they, in their particular bubble, do things to become trustworthy.
Right. And I'm thinking about how those three major areas that you mentioned dovetail with things that you can do with information as a piece of the puzzle. It's not the magic bullet, that's going to earn your customers trust, but in terms of providing transparency and disclosure, showing vulnerability and value exchange. I'm going to give you a recommendation that maybe doesn't benefit me, but like show you a competitor has a lower price, even if that doesn't benefit me. But you're going to remember that I showed you, that this was going to work. And then that long term alignment of answering questions or solving problems in really thorough ways, and that you're invested in the long-term life cycle of whatever your product or service is meant to provide, even if it doesn't necessarily relate to directly to your product or service.
Yeah, like this idea of showing other people's prices is one, but there's another one which is easier in some sense, is to say which type of people would benefit more from a competitor's product. So forget price, but imagine I sold a digital camera. I say here's the camera there, but if you are a nature photographer and what you're going to take pictures of is animals in the savannah, go and use this other company, right? It's not just about price, it's about saying, here is what we're amazing at, and here's what we're not. And the moment we say what we're not, you also trust me more about what I'm saying I'm amazing. If I say I'm amazing in everything, and it's so interesting, right? Because when we kind of all know it in the personal relationship, right? You go to an interview and people say, what is your weakness point? And I know people say I'm too caring about other people and I too care about details and so on. But expressing some shortcomings, expressing where we're not as good, also increase the trust that what we're saying when we are good is actually correct.
And I think even from a brand perspective, that is almost, the brand version of self-awareness that demonstrates a kind of expertise. We're interested in being experts. And as an expert, we can evaluate the field objectively and say, these are our strengths, these are our weaknesses. And we know so much about everything that we know that difference and we're willing to recognize it. I wanted to touch really quickly on something you said that before that was interesting regarding periods, environments of stress and anxiety, and then control. Right, so that we're looking for stories, we're looking for complex explanations because that gives us more of a sense of control because suddenly you have mastery over this complex story. But we've seen, and it's been particularly tied to post-pandemic behavior, but the desire for more self-directed behavior online, digitally in particular, interactions with brands. I don't want to get on the phone with a salesperson. I want to be able to do everything myself and evaluate the information on my own terms. Can we actually tie that to this sort of phenomenon that you're talking about? It's not just digital behavior, it's really like almost stress and anxiety causing this creation of a desire for, I want control over the purchase process because I don't trust you to influence that process. And how do you sort of grapple with that as a brand?
So I was about 3 years in hospital, I was, badly burned, and the only thing I had control in the beginning was when I would take my morphine injection. We had all the patients had a fixed amount of morphine injections, and the only thing we could do is decide when we want to take those. Later on, they created a button, patient control analgesia, when the patient could decide. But even that one thing is amazing. Now, if you think about overall control, I think we have less and less control. Bureaucracy is on the rise. People are more and more busy. We crave control. We have less and less of that. If you think about the basket of control, and the basket of control needs to be connected to well-being, how much control we get from our daily life is lower. How much control do we get from our family life is lower. The kids are more busy. Everybody is more busy. It's mostly a struggle with lack of control rather than feeling more control. So I think the need for control. I think some shopping therapy comes from that, right? It's like shopping therapy is amazing. Here's a jacket. It used to owned by these people. Now it's owned by me. Like I changed the world just by giving them a number. It's an amazing sense of control. But I think that, planning a vacation or deciding about something, I think these are psychologically very, very important as stress is increasing. In the pandemic, like people ask, what exercise should they do? People ask lots of things. And I said, do a kind of exercise where you could see progress, like doing plank. Like if you go walking, it's hard to see progress. If you do plank in a week, you'll see, my goodness, how much I've improved. If you do push-ups or sit-ups, you'll see improvement. And the idea was to do things that give us a sense in a world in which we're losing so much ability to control. Any ability to control makes things better and is psychologically very healing. So if I was a brand, I would think very carefully about, are there ways for me to increase the sense of control that people have.
I love that, and you've said something else I think that dovetails with from your talks about increasing sort of motivation and reducing friction at the same time. These two really important things where you're talking about how can you show results along the process and the path, tangible, meaningful results, and reduce friction in the process so you're not having to, jump through an extra hoop to get there.
And sometimes, even if you have to increase friction and increase a bit the effort, but this effort is going to result in higher level of control, it might be worth it. These are two kind of forces that need to be weigh against each other. But when you say it's not just about waking up in the morning and having all the things we wanted just appear in our doorstep, there is something about the process of feeling in control, the process of thinking I'm changing something, I'm doing something that is important. So how it's friction on one hand, feeling of control on another. We need to think about how we balance those two.
Absolutely. Well, I hate that we've run out of time. It's too little time with you here, Professor Ariely. Is there anything else before we sign off, that any advice that you would have for marketers, overarching advice on the current climate other than what you've already mentioned?
So I think that understanding the process of adopting misbeliefs is incredibly important. And I think that understanding the world of trust and resilience and to think about how we want to add to that is incredibly important. At the end of the day, when we sell a product, there's the direct concrete benefits and there's the benefits that come with it. So, maybe I'm getting a glass of wine, and in a concrete way, I'm getting some calories and some alcohol and some color and but I'm also consuming where this wine came from, and I'm also consuming a ritual, and it's also connecting me to a day I spend in Napa or whatever it is, right? But almost everything is like that the products that we sell, many of them have kind of the direct tangible benefit, but they also have an envelope of other benefits as well. And to think more carefully about these other benefits, especially given where we are today in society, I think is incredibly important. How do we get our products to give people a sense of comfort, a sense of belonging, peace of mind, a moment of disconnection from our electronics? How do we get a sense of accomplishment? Like, there's just a lot of them that we need to think about how we create.
I love that. The importance of serving sort of those emotional and psychological needs areas and thinking about how your product dovetails with that. I think that's a message that will resonate a lot with our audience, especially content marketers who view themselves as privileged to be in the position of thinking about how to tell story in a way that's experiential and tapping into the emotional needs of the audience. So thank you so much again, Professor Ariely. We'd love to have you back for a second conversation. We could keep going on forever. I appreciate your time and you sharing your wisdom with us today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Content Disrupted, brought to you by Skyward. Stay up to date on the latest ideas and insights in brand building and content marketing by visiting our website at skyward.com. Join us for our next episode, where we'll continue to challenge marketing norms and inspire you with fresh strategies for growing business through brand storytelling. See you there.